12 you have joined. Welcome. We'll give everybody a few minutes to get admitted. So I have 12:05 and I think we should go ahead and get started. Good day to you all. And you've joined us for Storytelling in Emergency Medicine, the essential intertwining of patient and physician. Your moderators today are Rita Manfredi and Arlene Chung, and I'll introduce you to our storytellers later. We have no disclosures. We do have some objectives. And what you're going to do today is you're going to practice actively listening to stories to better connect with your patients. And you're going to listen to those stories here that your colleagues are going to tell. And you're going to translate what we call this radical listening into your practice when you're speaking with patients so you can make a better connection with them. Better connections mean better care. And what this all does is it increases physician resilience and wellness by listening and immersing yourself in the oral experience. So physicians do need to be able to listen to what the patient narrates. And you know that every single patient has a story. We need the competence and the scientific ability, but we also need to be able to listen to the narrative of the patient. We've got to grasp the meaning of what they're saying. And then what we have to do is we have to be moved to act on their behalf. So I bet you all think you're good listeners. Well, I'm here to tell you that it's imperative to take a real good, realistic look at yourself. I thought I was a splendid listener until I started my part-time fellowship in hospice and palliative and found out that what I've been doing for years was not quite right. So you are going to learn how to radically listen today. Radical listening is listening unperturbed by what it is you expect to hear. It's a listening where you don't know what you're listening for. It's like being a mirror. And that is how you learn what you need to know about the patients that you treat. When you immerse in this oral experience, you make a connection with another human. And with that comes a sense of well-being and making a difference. So we are not going to be like this patient-physician interaction where the patient says to the physician, "You're not listening to what you're hearing." Our storytellers with us today are Nikita Joshi, Mark Probst, L.A. Alvarez, Cameron Mosayan, Owen Lee Park, Anne-Marie Cardell. Anne-Marie, I'm going to stop sharing and you can take it away.
Hi, my name is Anne-Marie Cardell, and I am an attending physician out in Maimonides Hospital in Brooklyn. My story starts in March of 2020, like a lot of stories. And to set the stage, I was pregnant at the time, and I was the not too big, but fully transitioned to maternity clothing. So starting to use those maternity figs. And my first patient back in March was incidental. It was the first patient for our ER. He came in for flank pain, ended up having a kidney stone, but the CAT scan of the abdomen pelvis also showed bilateral ground glass infiltrates. First time we'd seen them. Radiology recognized the pattern. They figured it out, and the doctors that saw him got sent home. They were quarantined. We recognized it. We thought we'd contained it. I was working that night. I had no direct contact with patient zero, but a couple days later, probably around 3 or 4, I developed a cough, and it kept going for like 2, 3 weeks. No shortness of breath, no fevers. Baby was moving fine, but I couldn't go to my OB because I had a cough, and I wasn't allowed in there. And so she couldn't check me out, and then I couldn't go get tested because I did not meet CDC criteria because I did not have direct contact with anybody from Wuhan. And then I couldn't call out of work because we just quarantined like a big chunk of our staff, and I didn't have a fever. And so we were only sending people. I didn't meet criteria for any of these things, and I felt unsure and uneasy, but I just kept going. And so as the pandemic had progressed, so did my belly. Eventually, I found out what I'd had right at the beginning was COVID. I had antibodies drawn, a month and a half later. And as I start getting bigger, the patients came in faster. And soon I was waddling around the ER in those zip up white jumpsuits, looking something between the Michelin Man or the ghost from Ghostbusters, depending on the 80s reference that you recognize. But it was around this time when I was 30 weeks pregnant that New York made the decision to kick family out of the labor and delivery. And it was in that whole realm of trying to limit the amount of visitors at the hospital. But that was the time where I think I finally went from doctor to terrified patient of what am I going to do? I don't think I can deliver this baby without my husband there. I needed help. I needed support. I needed somebody to hold my hand. And as much as what I do in simulation is teach these difficult deliveries, I spend all this time talking to residents about what do you do for a shoulder? What do you do for hemorrhage? And I was terrified of pushing my own baby out, despite the fact that everything was going fine. And what if I tested positive for COVID? What if my neighbor in the bed next door had COVID? If I tested positive for COVID, would they take my baby away? Would they allow me to see her if I was positive? And then what if my husband was positive? Could he touch the baby? And then I wanted help from my mom because, first time mom, didn't know what I was doing. She couldn't come up. She's high risk. So she's in Atlanta. How do I get help? Is it safe to ask for help? Should I not? I kept having all these questions, and I didn't know what to do. What if we ran out of ventilators? Every hospital in New York was packed. And so I couldn't come up with answers that worked for New York City. I didn't know how to make this okay. And so my husband and I reached out to some family and friends in Atlanta. The numbers for COVID weren't so bad in Georgia. It seemed kind of crazy, but I found an OB, went to the same alma mater as me, Georgia Tech, and was willing to take this crazy Brooklyn doctor who wanted to drive all the way down the eastern seaboard to deliver her baby at 36 weeks pregnant. And so that's what we did. We rented a van because we don't own a car and packed up the baby stuff and the 2 dogs and my husband and drove, stopping every 2 hours for 2 days, 2 full days. And so at 36 weeks old, 36 weeks pregnant, I moved into my parents' basement, which is slightly larger than our Brooklyn apartment, with my entire tiny little family and these dogs. And that's where we quarantined for the next 6 weeks. And so a couple weeks after we got there, gave birth to my daughter. It was pretty magical and pretty ridiculously uncomplicated. It was like 8 hours in the hospital. She came out fine, got the epidural fine. Baby was okay. It was magical. our daughter Magnolia, Marie Dunham, came through without any real complications. And as she's coming up on her first birthday, which is in about 3 weeks from now, I've been thinking back over this past year, and COVID has taken so much from so many of us. Our lives have changed, our work has changed. But for my family, it gave us time. It gave us 6 magical weeks where we got to fit 3 grandparents, an uncle who's 21 years old, 2 dogs, and 2 very new, fresh parents into one large suburban Georgia house with a very tiny little 6-pound newborn. And as weird as it sounds, I am so incredibly grateful that COVID gave us that, because that was my magical little silver lining. And I got to become a mom while I was living in my parents' basement. But my little pandemic baby got to come home to this house full of love and full of people that cared for her so much. And it was a beautiful summer when she came home with the magnolia trees in bloom. And I am so thankful for that. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Anne-Marie, for sharing your story. I just feel like there was so much sadness and so much darkness in this past year that it is wonderful when there are like these rays of light. And I will say that I feel like your story speaks for all women who became mothers during the pandemic. And I understand some of your experiences intimately, and we will leave it at that. So again, thank you so much for sharing your story. It really is a wonderful, uplifting tale to kick us off for this session. So next up, we have Owen, who will be sharing his story.
Hi, everyone. My name is, can everyone hear me? Great. So my name is Owen Lee Park, and I'm from George Washington Hospital. Imagine the massive red sandstone canyons that stand so high that they look like they could poke a hole in the bright blue sky of the Utah desert, and the merciless cliffs that drop nearly 1,500 feet on either side, and the sign that reads, 13 hikers have fallen and died from Angel's Landing since 2000. My legs were shaking and felt unliftable, like they had become part of the rock itself. I clung ever so tightly to the small stone in front of me, and I looked at my father, who stared back at me with a look on his face, one mixed with some understanding of my fear and disappointment that we wouldn't be able to go on. Recently, I went on a 6-day camping trip to Zion National Park with my father. Ever since we immigrated from South Korea when I was in middle school, we had never gone on a father-son trip. In fact, I had never been alone with my dad for so long. This was a trip I requested because I'd been feeling so burned out from emergency medicine. Dad, let's go on a father-son trip to somewhere you can see the stars and be away from all of this. My father agreed. And boy, did we see stars. We saw so many stars, my head began to spin. We ate tons of instant ramen and burned campfire, bickered and drove and drove and drove. But little did I know that I would form one of the most unforgettable memories with my father during this trip, but also lessons that I would be able to take back to my workplace as a resident physician in emergency medicine. See, I am deathly scared of heights. Climbing the stairs in the clock tower on my undergraduate campus, I had to hold my friend's hand. Stepping onto the 12th floor of my friend's office building, I could feel my legs shaking and being called to the edge by the window panes that show the Hudson River. On our second day at Zion, we got on the shuttle bus, and we were told that many of the hikes had closed due to the pandemic. We got off the shuttle at, guess where? The foot of Angel's Landing. I looked up at the enormous stones and the sharp cliffs, and I thought, Angel's Landing, more like Devil's Crashing. My father and I started walking up, and within 10 minutes, I knew I was in trouble. My legs started to shake again, and about an hour in, we were at the halfway point where the angel would weed out the weaklings like me from the bold and the brave. I could see people lining up in batches to start climbing the narrow staircase to hell, and I could see in the distance tiny dots of people having made it all the way to the top. I said to my father, I can't do it, Dad. I don't think I can go on. My father looked me in the eyes, and that's when he started talking to me about Jesus. You see, he's not a religious man at all. Heck, he's a borderline hippie. But it was he who said to me, you see those people in batches and groups climbing up to the top in a group, cheering on, supporting each other. That's how you climb to the top, in a group. You talk about wanting to be a leader, Jesus was able to lead groups. I guess you're just not ready. I was dumbfounded. I was speechless. And I said to my dad, F you, Dad. Let's just go 50 more feet, just so I can see what's behind that hill over there. So I thought to myself, 50 more feet, and that's it. Next thing I knew, I went 50 more feet, and I said a few more curse words. Oh God, shit. Another 50 feet. You can do it, said the climber with their giggling little 7-year-old, not even holding onto the chain. Damn it, another 50 feet. You can do it, said the Instagram models who were casually taking model shots on the edge of the cliff. Thought to myself, many F words. And another 50 feet. Oh my God, we've made it to the top. I felt like I was on, quite literally, top of the world. So I want to tell this story because I learned 2 lessons from this trip that I want to share with all of you. First, every journey starts with one small step. And the second one, my biggest takeaway, is that emergency medicine training is much like climbing Angel's Landing. The more difficult the feat, the easier it is with a team, even if you have to curse a million times. Thank you.
Thank you, Owen. That was great. It's so inspiring. I really thought at the first, when you said at 50 feet, you were really going to stop. So you really surprised me that you went the whole way. And I'm so glad. And isn't that like emergency medicine? I'm really glad you brought that up. So we loved your story. And I'd like to go ahead and have Nikki start. For everyone who just came in, as Arlene says, thanks for joining us. We have a wonderful panel of storytellers with us today, and you're going to get to hear them. So Nikki, please take it away.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Nikki Joshi, and I'm at Alameda Health Systems here in California. The trauma ring down came down. There was a pregnant woman they were bringing in who had just been in a fire, and I was excited. I'm a white cloud. I read about everything. I actually even love pregnancy trauma. I had published something about a year ago, and yet I never see these patients in real life, but this was my opportunity. The patient came, the trauma team was there, and they began to do their assessment. But there are a few things that I noticed once she came in, and being the attending, I don't have to rush to do anything, and so I had the luxury of observation. This woman lay in the stretcher, her pregnant belly obviously gravid, expanding beyond the EMS blanket. She's staring at the ceiling, and she has clear stuff dripping from her nose. Her cheeks are splotchy with burns, and her feet are so burnt and so dirty, it looked painful. Trauma does their assessment, their primary and secondary survey, and I am in charge of airway, and so I stare at her from the front of the bed. I think about these dripping secretions, I think about her splotchy cheeks, and I know I have to intubate her. But I don't intubate her. There's something that stops me, and I'm not really sure why. The textbooks say intubate, and I didn't. I thought about her. Why is she staring at the ceiling, and why are her feet so dirty? How does she come to be in a fire in the middle of the night? I asked her what happened. I try to sneak in questions in between the trauma survey. And she said she heard an explosion, which I thought was the strangest response to get. An explosion in the middle of the night? Was she making drugs like Breaking Bad? That's just ridiculous. People don't really do these things in real life. And so I continued to ponder whether or not to intubate. At this point, trauma was done, and OB had come, and they were doing their assessments on the baby, and there were beautiful fetal Dopplers that filled the entire room. I asked her, who was in the home with you? And she said, my husband, my baby, and my mother. And I asked if she knew what happened to them. She didn't, and I didn't know what happened to them. And so time went on. I kept vacillating whether or not to intubate, and I couldn't. And I think it was because this idea that this isn't a patient, this is a woman who's pregnant. We don't know what happened to her family. And I just felt that to intubate, sedate, paralyze, take her away from that would rob her of knowing what happened to her family. It would treat the patient, but what about this woman who's in front of me? A few hours later, EMS came in for another reason. And during this time, I was trying to find a disposition for her. I needed a facility that had burn and OB capability, which turns out to be a quite rare combination. They came in for an unrelated reason and they had news. The father and the baby did not make it. And I just stopped. And I was at the doctor's station. And I looked over at her. She was behind me in another room, still staring at the ceiling. And all of a sudden, I knew something about her that she doesn't know. She is a widow. She has lost her child. And I just felt horrified. I felt cold. I felt trite. My reactions were the most inconsequential reactions out of anybody in this room. I got up, I saw more patients. I thought about what to do. Should I tell this person what had just happened to her? I'm still trying to debate whether or not to intubate her. I didn't tell her, and she left. For the next few weeks, I could not stop thinking about her, and I couldn't tell why I couldn't stop thinking about her. I've had many trauma patients over the course of my career. I've had a few pregnant patients, but she stuck with me. The next day, I had read about what had happened to her, and that was a mistake. I immediately realized. They suspected arson. Somebody had done this to her and her family. I stopped reading anything else about her. I couldn't do it. I kept thinking about her. I kept thinking about this father. I hoped that her father, this husband, and this child, I hoped that they had died in an embrace. That's the only way I could envision that this could have happened. Her feet had been dirty that night because she must have ran out of the home. Her husband must have woken her up. First priority, get her out of the house. Second priority, get this child. And then he failed. I kept thinking about her, and I finally thought that maybe the reason I thought about her is that she wasn't a patient. I felt like she was me, and I felt that she could have been me. I have a happy family. I looked at my children. None of their faces were burned. I look at my husband, and he's alive. But she's not me. She's also not a patient. She's a person. A few days later, I finished up her chart, and I realized that it had also been her birthday a few days before this horrible event. And that just made me feel even worse. Imagine what this birthday must have been like, the most amazing birthday of her life. She's pregnant, about to give birth. Her baby was due in 2 weeks. Her husband, her child, her mother, and now she had nothing. And then time went on. More weeks passed, and I realized that I actually had stopped thinking about her. She no longer haunted my thoughts. I would reflect every now and then, but it didn't stop me in my tracks. My body didn't feel cold. I moved on. But I knew that this woman would never be able to move on from this night. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikki, for sharing that story. Again, I think we've had so many emotions through this past year, and we already heard, we heard one sort of version of motherhood and life, and now, sort of the bookend on that. And I certainly, the detail and all of that, you just put me right at your feet. And feeling all those emotions. I know many of us in the audience have similar stories of patients that have stuck with us in all sorts of circumstances, and I know many of us can relate. So thank you for sharing that. Cameron, looks like we have you coming up next.
My name is Cameron Mozan. I'm one of the fourth-year residents at Stanford. And Nikki, thank you so much for that story. I feel overwhelmed. It's almost hard to talk, but I'm excited to share mine. So when I met Marianne, I was nearing the end of a nightmarishly low acuity shift, exhausted after a short turnover the night before. And there were multiple new patients on the board, and I was hoping for something easy. I, trying to be fair, just picked up the first patient I saw. It was a 42-year-old woman, ESI for weakness. And I figured I could get an EKG, some labs, an troponin, and hopefully be able to send her home. But I saw when I opened her chart that her chief complaint was really unable to walk times 2 years. And I scrolled dreadfully through multiple admissions focused on her inability to walk. Physical therapy, neurology clinic, EMGs and NCVs, no improvement. And finally, I saw that she had declined to see psych. I lumbered onto her room, the linoleum floor squeaking behind my dragging feet. And I prepared myself to, as kindly as I could, tell her that there was nothing I could do. So I asked her, why today? You've been to the emergency department for this a few times before. How do you think we can help you? And she turned her head away from me, her long golden earrings dragging over her shoulders. It was obviously not my best attempt. And she turned back and looked up tearfully, shaking her head, her earrings rattling, and the copious, scaly mascara starting to smear. I haven't walked for years, Ahaya Doctor. My pain, my legs, I cannot walk. I do not know what to do. She told me about her million doctors, about how she came to us because we are the best, and that she was hoping that we would be the ones who could figure it out. But just as she started to unbuckle some of her psychological trauma, major trauma was announced overhead. And I breathed a sigh of relief. I was like, oh, I really want to hear your story. I'm so sorry, I have to go. There's a sick patient overhead and I have to go. And I just ran out. And when I came back, 40 minutes after that shift was up, we just sat, talked, and I learned about her. Mariam was Persian, like me, and grew up knowing that she was homosexual and atheist, but she couldn't come out to her devout family. So she got married to a man who was similarly pious, and that relationship faltered. They both were sleeping with other women, and it ended in divorce. He was never physical, but he did respond abusively. He demeaned her, he restricted her movement, and her family in response shunned her too. And when they found out that she had come out, that she was homosexual, they had basically told her that she couldn't come back. They wouldn't talk to her. The weakness started, the depression set in, and she felt like there was absolutely nobody that could be there for her. And when she came to the hospital for help, she felt like her physicians were insisting that she was faking it. Her trust in medicine had totally been ruptured. So we talked about that, but I decided eventually to refocus the conversation and share a story about myself. And during my first year of medical school, I had severe uncontrollable allergies. It was constant posterior, but also very much anterior nasal drip. I was hacking bloody phlegm during class, disrupting everybody, sneezing dramatically during the lectures and running out of the room, snot dripping from my face, going to the bathroom, and nothing I could do would treat my symptoms. My skin was bristling with eczema, excoriated, wrapping around both sides of my neck, my hands, my elbows, and nothing would make it better. My life was coated with Vaseline. I got antibiotics for bronchitis from my doctor, which I didn't take because I knew better. I overdosed on antihistamines. I tried nasal steroids, saline rinses, and nothing made me feel better. And when I was doing my final exam, basically anchored, chained to my chair, time test, essay, right? My sleeves became my napkins. They were adorned with crusted, slimy mucus, and my laptop was streaking. It was disgusting, and nobody who was sitting next to me wanted to be that person. But probably 3-4 hours after I walked out of that exam, my nostrils started to clear. And by the evening, my eyes, they're puffy, but they had deflated. Next day, my symptoms did not come back, and they stayed gone. I said to her, look, everybody thinks you're faking this. I get that. They can't see your pain. They can't see a reason that you can't walk, and neither can I. But everybody could see that I had allergies. It was so obvious. Nobody could deny me that. There's something wrong with your body. There was something wrong with mine. So she laughed and she made fun of me because my stressor was ridiculous and my problem was way mild in comparison, but she believed me and she agreed to one last admission. This time it was psych, and she got a voluntary stay. So when I checked her chart the next evening after another similar shift, I was baffled. Apparently that morning, they had gone to her room to round on her, and they called a code gray because she was gone. And when they were looking for her, they found her walking back to the room from the cafeteria, her spindly legs wobbling beneath her, holding a half cup of coffee in one hand with a croissant, and in the other hand, the wall. It was not a star performance, but this was a woman who had been wheelchair dependent for 2 years and had the atrophied legs to show it. She worked with physical therapy, she was recommended a cane, she organized outpatient care, and she walked out of the hospital. And what I realized was in that moment, she didn't need me to be her doctor. And I was struggling that year, and I did not need her to be my patient, but we were so helpful, so meaningful to each other as just one person talking to another. And the only reason why I knew was because I had checked her chart.
Thank you so much, Cameron. Wow. You know, I think we've all had those easy patients where you look at the chart, I can get this one out really quick. And I just imagine your heart dropping when you saw that this was going to take hours and hours and hours. And so it sounds like you actually were radically listening to her when she was telling you her story. And you made that connection. And I just wonder, you know, how much that had to do with her own healing. You know, that human connection of one to one makes such a big difference. And, you know, while he was telling the story, I was also wondering, you know, I wonder if you thought, boy, I wish somebody could have listened to me, and would my snottiness have gone away a lot earlier? You know, and I just extrapolate that to our COVID patients. I just wonder if that's what we should be doing, even though we're all so harried for time. So thank you so much, Cameron. That was really wonderful. And we'll go ahead and move on next to LA. Take it away, LA.
Hi there, my name is L.A. Alvarez, and I'm one of the faculty here at Stanford. Growing up in the Philippines was easy. I'd wake up and our nanny would cook breakfast and she would help us get ready for school. Then when school ended, my grandpa, a bus driver, would be waiting outside to take us back home. We had everything we needed in the Philippines, except for my mom. My mom left us for the United States when I was 7, so she can provide for us. She worked as a nurse in New York. She would send us money every month. I got to know my mom through the telephone and occasionally in person when she got to visit us once a year. Despite this, I was actually very close to my mom. On the phone, I tell her about how I was doing in school, about my brothers and my cousins, the fun things we did back home. I tell her how much I love her, how much I missed her. I have 2 younger brothers, and our lives changed when I was 13, when she sent for us to move to New York. It was a big change, and it was a lot harder than we thought. We didn't really know how to do basic things like doing laundry or cleaning the house, let alone cook. After all, we were raised with nannies. All of a sudden, we had to learn how to live together without any external support. All of a sudden, my mom was a stranger to us. She stumbled into a situation she never initially planned, being a single mom thousands of miles away from her family. She was trying to be a mom, and we were learning how to be her sons. We had no idea what we were doing. And it didn't help that I was going through the rebellious stage of adolescence. I did not make it easy for her. It felt suffocating to have a mom check in on us every day and how our day was going. In the Philippines, at least I would have days to summarize my weeks into short phone calls. So at 16, I quickly took the opportunity to graduate early from high school. I moved at least 8 hours away to attend college, far enough from my mom not to hover, but not too far that we couldn't see each other after a short flight. Surprisingly, we actually became a lot closer again. We talked on the phone about my classes, my work, our family back home. The years passed and I went to medical school. Finally, in my 20s, I felt like I had the mom that I wanted when I was 10. And so for residency, I trained at Jacobi in the Bronx, which was a lot closer to my mom than I'd ever been in almost a decade. She was so excited that while still working full-time as a nurse, she'd come to my apartment in the Upper East Side every weekend to clean and to bring me food. She'd drive through the Manhattan traffic just to see me, which, by the way, she dreaded because it was too chaotic for her. But it was her way of showing her love. I remember at one point I told my mom, you know, you should really get started to start enjoying your life. I wanted to prepare her for when her kids would go our own way. Plus, I was almost sure I'd leave New York City after residency, and I felt guilty. So I told her to consider going out on a date to find her life partner. She smiled. So intern year was going well. It was a lot of work, and well, my mom eventually took my advice and finally started dating. This, of course, meant that she wasn't at my apartment on weekends bringing me food, and I missed this. I was a resident, so after one busy Friday evening shift, I decided to come home with my laundry, just like in college. I got to her apartment at around 2 or 3 in the morning, trying to be as quiet as I could so as not to wake her up. Home cooked food, of course, awaited for me in the refrigerator. And after the much needed meal, I passed out on the couch. Suddenly, I heard my mom screaming, "Ale, ta, Ale." It was still dark. I thought I was dreaming. I opened my eyes to the living room covered in smoke, one side in flames. Fire! I quickly stood up, trying to figure out what was happening or where I was. I could barely see anything because of the smoke. I remember seeing my mom struggling to grab my blue winter jacket she gave me a few years back. She was headed towards the kitchen as if to collect water from the faucet with my jacket. "Dad," she yelled. I told her we should run. "No, help me," she said. "The house." It was happening so fast. By then, the entire living room was on fire. The smoke was overwhelming. I pulled my mom out of the house and gave her a tight hug. She pulled away and ran around the corner, banging on the door for the upstairs neighbors. "Fire, fire." I hear more panic screaming. I forgot there's even people upstairs. I was so discombobulated. Then I saw my mom running back and trying to get into the house. The keys. We need to get the car keys. At this point, the fire trucks finally arrived. By then, the house was fully engulfed in fire. I can still hear my mom screaming, "I've lost everything. Ta, Langga, we've lost everything." My mom having this house, let alone us moving to the United States, was not planned. We were only supposed to come for a visit. Around the time we received our green card, her marriage was falling apart, and she then decided to move us closer to her. Imagine all of a sudden having to raise 3 grown kids all at once without any savings enough to live a life in this country. She had to make do with the finances she could scrape together. As a single mom, she decided to take on 3 jobs just to support us. She worked as a nurse in different capacities at all hours, day and night. She wanted us to have a normal life. She tried to give us a normal life. She'd work overnight when we're asleep. She'd get home in time to help us get ready for school. She'd then sleep while we're at school, and on certain days, she would have jobs lined up. In addition to our needs, she tried to give us what our kids would want: a computer, our own bicycle. She even took us to Disney the year we arrived. She built our home in Long Island. Everything in that apartment was something that she worked for. And in 10 minutes, all of our belongings turned to ashes. I didn't know what to say. I gave her a hug. I couldn't cry. I've never seen my mom cry like this. For the first time in front of me, I could see my mom breaking down. My mom and I are close, yet she always managed to look strong for us. For the first time, I felt like our roles have reversed. For the first time, I felt like she was looking up to me for comfort, for a solution. My mom was crying, and the best thing that I could say was, "Mom, at least we get to shop for new clothes again." She paused, looked at me, and continued to sob. "It's all gone," she kept on saying. My mom stayed with her guy that night, and I went back to work. Over the next several months, my mom found a new place. I remember when I first visited her, I didn't know what to say or what to expect. I noticed something different. The decor was simple, yet still carried a sense of style, a mixture of bright colors and open space, but the focus of the apartment and of her way of living had changed. Whatever photographs she could get reprinted, she posted on the walls. Christmas also changed. Instead of buying each other presents, it's as if we're so worried we'd lose them again to a fire. So instead, we started spending on shared experiences. Every year, we'd try to meet up somewhere that's new for all of us. We'd gone to Mont Tremblant for a winter holiday together, even though she doesn't even do any winter sports. We surprised her with a road trip in southern Spain to celebrate her 60th. It may sound cliche, but my mom and I have realized that the material things can come and go. In true emergency medicine fashion, she's coming to visit next week so that we can celebrate Mother's Day in person. Also, we take a lot of pictures to make up for all the photos that we've lost of us growing up. I haven't talked about this experience in a while. Perhaps I'm thinking about it now because I recently got my own place, and I understand a bit more how she might have felt watching it all catch fire and then disappear before our eyes. Or perhaps it's because my mom finally went on a vacation by herself. She got to see places she's always talked about, Bethlehem, the Sea of Galilee, places I haven't gone before. Growing up, my mom talked about different places that she's traveled, and she inspired me to travel. It warms me to know that my mom has taken this passion for travel again. And for the first time in a long time, she's traveling without any stakes on the line. My mom traveled across the world for the direst of reasons, to find a job that would pay her enough to raise her kids. The house fire destroyed everything we had, and yet it's given us a different understanding of home. Maybe home is having each other, and we can take home with us on the road. Maybe that's why I travel. I'm still glad I have the opportunity to travel with my mom, and not for survival, but simply for the purest pleasure and joy of discovering new things together. And I can't wait for my next trip with her.
I think your story really highlights the importance of things in life that really are important, right? The things that really matter. And thank you for sharing something super personal. Your mother sounds like an amazing human being, a phenomenal human being. It makes me want to meet her, and she's certainly raised some wonderful children, of course. And so thank you again for sharing your story, LA. And I have I guess I have the honor of introducing our last storyteller for this session. So Mark, are you ready to take it away?
I am ready. Thank you, Arlene. So my name is Mark Probst. I'm from Columbia University Medical Center in New York City. And I want to tell you a story about workplace safety. So this is a story that happened to me back in 2014. I was working in East Harlem at Mount Sinai Hospital. I had just finished fellowship, and I was a freshly minted attending, very confident, and I thought I could crack every case and figure out every diagnosis. And I was coming in for a morning shift, and I was taking sign out from the overnight team, and it was kind of a long board, and there was a bunch of sign outs that were kind of almost done, and then there was one last patient to be signed out. And the attending kind of looked at me and sighed and said, okay, this last one is a 30-year-old female with a history of severe bacterial meningitis, complicated by hydrocephalus that required a VP shunt. Now she lives at home with her two sisters who take care of her. And she had presented the previous day with altered mental status. Her sisters had brought her in saying she wasn't responsive, wasn't herself, wasn't making any sense. So like any good emergency medicine team, they had done a full infectious and metabolic workup. They had done lab work and urine studies and a CT head. Neurosurgery had been consulted to do a tap of the VP shunt to make sure that she didn't have another infection. Then neurology got involved to see if maybe she was in subclinical status. They had recommended an MRI for an occult stroke. And then everything had come back unremarkable. The labs, the CT head, the MRI, and the fluid from the shunt, everything was negative. And now it was kind of the morning. All the consultants had basically signed off, and they said, Mark, if you could just reassess her and try to discharge her home. I said, great. Just my favorite thing to do when you have no relationship with the patient is to tell them they have to leave. So I kind of, gathered my thoughts, and I went to the bedside, and I started to kind of reassess her and talk to the two sisters who were there. And I said, I introduced myself. I said, my name is Mark Probst. I'm one of the, daytime doctors taking over for the night team. How is your sister doing? And they said, actually, she's basically back to normal. She's herself again. This is how she usually is. I said, well, that's great. That's great. I said, do you feel comfortable taking her home? They said, yeah, no, we can take her home, but we just want to know, like, what happened. So I said, well, we did labs. That was normal. The urine was normal. The CT scan and the MRI was normal. And even the tap of the shunt was normal. So basically all the test results we did were all normal. so you can take her home. And the eldest sister, who was a taller woman, she was probably about 6 feet, maybe 200 pounds, was wearing all black. And she kind of leans in and she says, yeah, but what happened? Why was she so strange and unresponsive yesterday? And I looked at her and I took a deep breath and I said, to be honest, I don't know. And she took a step towards me and she wrapped her arms around me and picked me up and gave me a massive bear hug that lifted me off the ground. And she said, thank you. Thank you so much, because you're the first person that's been honest with us. And she put me down, and I kind of said some niceties, and I walked away and did the discharge paperwork, and they went home. And I learned an important lesson that day. And that lesson was to always be humble and to be transparent about uncertainty. Uncertainty is something we deal with every day in emergency medicine. And we don't like it, and patients don't like it. But if we lead with a caring approach and genuinely try to connect with our patients and show a little bit of vulnerability by revealing this uncertainty, patients may actually trust us more. And from that day forth, I learned the power of these 3 simple words: I don't know.
Thank you, Mark, for your story. That was quite a story about workplace safety, huh? It sounds like you really did have to make that last-minute connection when you were trying to discharge this patient. And with that intimidating sister, you expect her to punch you in the nose rather than give you a big hug. So maybe this workplace safety was more a safety of the heart. She felt that her heart was safe with you because of your honesty. So thank you so much. And I think Arlene and I would like to thank every one of you who came today to hear what we had to say. Arlene, last minute words.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us here. We are about 50 past the hour. Look at that for time. And we hope that going forward, maybe this will inspire you all to tell your own stories wherever in the world you may be. So again, thank you for joining us and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Take care, everyone.